It's why I looked out at our press corps of the Pentagon and called them the Pharisees in the press. It's because they look for every problem.
Well, I'm asking you about
look for every
Ukraine.
problem that exists,
Ukraine
and you
has been
miss
militarily defeated.
You missed the
I would
plank.
submit, based on my 9 trips to Ukraine, that is a false narrative that the president's buying.
We are 2 months into a historic military success in Iran, and you want to call it a defeat. And it's defeatist Democrats like you that cloud the mind of the American people and would otherwise fully support preventing Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
Richard Blumenthal, longest-serving Attorney General in Connecticut history, just pressed Pete Hegseth on the true cost of the Iran war and secured a commitment that will matter to tens of thousands of wounded veterans. The Pentagon's official figure is $25 billion. Richard Blumenthal says that's likely less than a quarter of the real total once you count destroyed bases, replaced planes and munitions, and the care of the wounded. 400 service members have been injured. And when they retire, current law docks their pension dollar for every disability payment they receive, the so-called Wounded Warrior Tax. Richard Blumenthal extracts Hegseth's commitment to support ending it. Then he delivers a line about the war itself that lands like a verdict. Watch this. If you want to support the channel and get exclusive videos, kindly hit the join button below. That's how we keep this going.
The costs of war include caring for our veterans. We've had an estimate from Mr. Hirsch yesterday that the cost to date in dollars for this war has been $25 billion, which I believe is well below the actual cost based on everything that I've heard, everything available to us in various kinds of settings, and I'm going to ask for a more accurate assessment. But we also know that about 400 service members have been wounded as a result of this war. When they retire, when they come home, their retirement pay will be docked dollar for dollar for every disability benefit dollar they receive. Secretary Hegseth, I'd like your commitment that you will support the Major Richard Starr Act that will eliminate this wounded warrior tax. I'm sure you're familiar with it. Tens of thousands of servicemen and women now are reduced in their retirement pay literally for every dollar of disability benefits they receive.
Well, I appreciate your focus on this issue, and I will tell you of the, you mentioned roughly 400 that have been injured. Thankfully, over 90% are returned to duty. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't have a residual challenge. And we're tracking that at point of injury to ensure that that is noted, even though they're returned to duty.
But what I'd like is your commitment that you will support the Major Richard Starr.
As I have said in the past to other organizations, we support the Richard Starr Act.
Thank you. On the issue of cost, Mr. Hurst, does that $25 billion estimate include all of the costs in terms of damage to our bases, the need to replace planes and munitions, and the costs of injuries to our servicemen and women?
Senator, so for the Milcon facilities replacement cost, that's probably the hardest thing to estimate right now because we don't know what our future posture is going to be or the future construction of those bases.
Well, you owe it to us. You're here to ask for appropriations.
Of course.
And I would like a more accurate estimate of what has been done that will require replacement and renovation, as well as the other costs. And I think $25 billion is probably less than half, maybe less than a quarter of the total cost of war, which is the reason why the supplemental request is much higher. So I think you owe it to the American people to give us the straight talk about what the costs have been. Mr. Secretary, I know you have characterized this war as an astonishing military success, to use your words yesterday. But the American people aren't buying it. And I know you feel the American people are seeing through the abstruse stuff that is thrown at them, but one point is irrefutable, which is America never succeeds in war unless the American people are behind it. And if what you're seeing as success now is winning, I would hate to see what losing looks like, because none of the shifting and contradictory objectives of the war so far have been achieved. Likewise, let me ask you, yesterday, the president said that Ukraine has been, quote, militarily defeated. I assume you don't agree with that assessment.
The negative nature in which you characterize the incredible and historic effort in Iran is part of the reason, Senator, why the American people view it the way they do. It's why I looked out at our press corps at the Pentagon and called them the Pharisees in the press. It's because they look for every problem.
Well, I'm asking you about
look for every
Ukraine.
problem that exists,
Ukraine
and you
has been
miss.
militarily defeated.
You miss the
I would
plank.
submit, based on my 9 trips to Ukraine, that is a false narrative that the president's buying.
We are 2
from
months
Vladimir
into a
Putin.
historic
I hope
military success in Iran, and
will
you want to call it a
dispute it
defeat. And it's
because
defeatist Democrats
it
like
is
you
the
that
people
cloud the
of
mind of the
Ukraine
American
who are
people
fighting
and
for their
would otherwise
survival,
fully support
fight no
preventing
help
Iran from having a
the
nuclear weapon.
Administration, and they are bravely fighting our fight. And that is the reason that I'm pursuing the Russian sanctions bill, which is bipartisan, along with Senator Graham, and why I hope we will recognize our obligation to release that $400 million, which we've appropriated.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questions, I'd like to take a moment to highlight the true costs of this war, both for the military and everyday Americans. And the true cost of the president's illegal war with Iran. And since the start of the war, 14 brave U.S. service members have been killed and more than 400 have been wounded. We've burned through over $25 billion in taxpayer money with no end in sight. And the fiscal year 27 budget request is a massive 42% increase from last year. Hundreds of critical munitions have been expended, and deployments have been extended, directly impacting service members' quality of life, military readiness, and our ability to deter our adversaries. The relationships with our allies, some of our closest allies and partners, have been fractured. And the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which somehow caught the president by surprise, even though he had to have been warned, is directly contributing to the affordable crisis that Americans are facing. Energy costs are skyrocketing, with the price of gas now at its highest level in almost 4 years. Instability has driven interest rates to its highest level since September of last year. The cost of fertilizer is spiking, which will have a direct impact on the cost of food. This illegal war is driving up costs, undermining readiness, and alienating our allies, with neither a clear rationale for starting this war nor an exit strategy. And when the president was asked how long he'll let this war continue, he said, "Do not rush me." I have a question for General Kane relating to women serving in combat, and I'd like to hear your best military advice. Does the mere fact of women being in combat armed units lower standards or readiness if they meet the physical standards?
Well, ma'am, the standards are set by the civilians. We have examples of women leading well across the joint force. I'll highlight some of our current commanders engaged in the fight in Epic Fury. Specifically, one of our bomb squadrons are led by an extraordinary female leader who's doing great work. And
Okay.
but those standards are set by. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
I think your answer is that in fact it does not lower standards of readiness. Second question, should every service member, regardless of gender, be permitted to serve in any role, including the combat arms, if they meet the standards established? Yes or no?
Is that to me, ma'am?
Over the last decade, since combat arms have been open to women, have you personally seen any instance where the standard resulted in a degradation in combat effectiveness?
Apologies, I didn't hear your first question. People policies are all set by the civilian
No, I'm
leaders in
asking
the
you
government.
personally
Could
in
you
this
repeat the question again? I'm sorry, ma'am.
Over the last decade, since combat arms have been open to women, have you personally seen any instance where the standard resulted in a degradation in combat effectiveness?
Again, I'll highlight that the standards are set by our civilian leaders.
Thank you.
Women continue to perform well across a range of MOSs and
Your
jobs and
answer is-
AFSCs that are out
Our
there.
experience, no. I do need to get to a question for Secretary Hegseth. Prior to your nomination hearing, you said women shouldn't serve in combat armed units. At your confirmation hearing, you reversed course, and, and you basically said as long as the women meet the standards, they should be able to serve. But recently, you ordered a review of the effectiveness of women in combat roles, and I am concerned you are laying the groundwork to reverse the policy allowing women to serve in these units, because right now, current law, if you want to change this policy, current law requires you to submit a report to Congress justifying such a change. So did you order the review to support a potential decision to overturn the policy of having women in combat roles?
We are laser focused on standards. The highest male standard for every combat arms position should be the standard. And 10 years into this, we are reviewing it, which is what the American people would expect. Also, there's nothing illegal about a war that defends the American people and prevents Iran from having a nuclear bomb.
You didn't answer the question, because the reason that you're asking for this review, I think, has to do with your earlier position that you don't think women should serve in combat roles. So now we have this study, and I'd like to ask you,
Senator,
will you reveal the study to the public, to the American people? Will you make the study public?
will you make that study?
Yes or no?
We're doing the study for that very reason, to ensure that
Make the
real
study
science
public.
is applied to this question and not
We
social
appreciate-
engineering like the previous
We
administration.
appreciate your assurance that that will be made public.
Yeah, I think it's really critical
you.
that this study be made.
Let's be absolutely clear about what Richard Blumenthal accomplished in this exchange. He did two things at once. He forced an admission that the Pentagon's cost figure for the Iran war is almost certainly a fraction of the real total, and he secured a public commitment from the Secretary of Defense to support ending a policy that financially penalizes wounded veterans. And then he delivered a judgment on the war that cuts through the administration's triumphant language. The first concrete issue is the wounded warrior tax. Under current law, when many disabled veterans retire, their military retirement pay is reduced dollar for dollar by the amount of disability compensation they receive from the VA. In other words, they can't collect both their earned pension and their disability benefits in full. One offsets the other. Veterans advocates have fought for years to eliminate this offset through legislation Blumenthal references as the Major Richard Starr Act, named for a combat veteran who died of cancer while fighting for the very benefits the law would provide. Blumenthal ties it directly to the Iran war. Roughly 400 service members have been wounded, and when they come home and eventually retire, this offset will dock their pay for every disability dollar they receive. He presses Hegseth for a commitment to support the act, not a vague expression of concern, but a commitment. Hegseth, after some hedging about how 90% of the wounded return to duty, states that the department supports the Major Richard Starr Act. Blumenthal pins it down. That commitment, on the record, is a concrete win for tens of thousands of veterans. The second issue is the honest accounting of what this war has cost. The Pentagon's witness, Mr. Hurst, presented a figure of $25 billion. Blumenthal doesn't accept it. He asks directly whether that number includes the damage to American bases, the cost of replacing destroyed planes and munitions, and the cost of caring for the wounded. The Pentagon official concedes that the military construction and facilities replacement costs are the hardest to estimate because they don't yet know what the future posture or reconstruction of those bases will be. Blumenthal's response is pointed. You owe it to us. You're here asking for appropriations, asking the American people for money. and you owe them straight talk about what the war has actually cost. He estimates the real total is likely more than double, perhaps more than quadruple, the $25 billion figure, which is precisely why the administration's supplemental funding request is so much larger than the stated cost. The gap between the number they announce and the number they quietly request tells the real story. Then Blumenthal turns to the war itself, and this is where the exchange sharpens. Hegseth has characterized the Iran war as an astonishing military success. Blumenthal's rejoinder is one of the most memorable lines of the hearing. He says the American people aren't buying it. That one point is irrefutable. America never succeeds in war unless the American people are behind it, and that if what Hegseth is calling success is winning, he'd hate to see what losing looks like, because Blumenthal notes none of the shifting and contradictory objectives of the war have actually been achieved. Hegseth's response is to go on the attack. He blames the negative characterization for why the public views the war poorly. He references having called the Pentagon press corps the Pharisees in the press for focusing on problems. He accuses Blumenthal of looking for every problem and missing the larger picture, and calls him a defeatist Democrat clouding the minds of the American people. It's a revealing move. Rather than answering the substance about costs and unmet objectives, Hegseth attacks the questioner in the press for describing reality, but Blumenthal doesn't take the bait on the terms Hegseth offers. He pivots to a related point of leverage. He notes the president recently claimed Ukraine has been militarily defeated, an assessment Blumenthal, drawing on his 9 trips to Ukraine, calls a false narrative the president is buying from Vladimir Putin. And he connects it to policy. It's why he's pursuing a bipartisan Russian sanctions bill alongside Senator Graham, and why he believes the United States must honor its obligation to release $400 million in appropriated support. The through line of Blumenthal's questioning is accountability in the most practical sense. He's not just scoring rhetorical points. He's demanding an honest number for what the war costs, securing a concrete benefit for the people wounded fighting it, and challenging the gap between the administration's triumphant language and the unachieved objectives on the ground. His most quotable line, "I'd hate to see what losing looks like," works precisely because he earned it first with the specifics. When a decorated attorney general and Marine veteran lays out the real costs, secures a veteran's commitment, and then questions whether the war is the success it's advertised to be, the administration's answer, to call him a Pharisee-adjacent defeatist, only